Yeah, there we go. Yeah, I think one thing we could talk about is the God one, God two distinction from Paul van der Kolk.
Right.
Um, I saw with your talk with Karen, you sort of said you're on board with God one and you like the idea of God one, but you don't like the idea of God two.
Well,
So
it's not
what's
like I
sort of your
don't like
problem?
it. It's not a matter of liking. It's a matter of making sense out of it. And to me, I have a hard time with making sense of what that would be, or how it would really. I mean, I do have some issues with the very concept, actually. And I think I've talked to many times about this, but the God one to me is the God of order. So it represents the laws of nature, and some of these laws are relatively simple, like the laws of physics. Although simple, some people would say they are hard to understand, like quantum mechanics especially. But they are simple in that they are laws that apply to complicated systems, but not complex systems. When we talk about the human world and laws of human world, we're talking about the laws of complexity, and these are very different kinds of laws.
Could you distinguish
It's very
between
much
those
more
two?
difficult to tease those out.
Could you distinguish between complexity and complex? I think it's sort of like it's the distinction sort of one you can for the sort of the differences between complex and
Yeah,
complicated.
complicated. Well, in
Well, one you can
terminology,
disclose.
you can use the two interchangeably. I mean, people, I think that when they say, like, they could say a car engine is a complex thing, but in the formal sense of complexity theory, a car engine is not complex at all. It's very simple. It's a
Mhm.
maybe for somebody that's not a car mechanic, first time you open and tear it apart, and then you want to put it back together, it's going to look very complicated to you if you don't have any training, right?
Mhm.
It's it's simple in the sense that, if you take at the car as a whole, when you push on the accelerator pedal, the response is going to be very predictable.
Mhm.
Or if you change gears, or, I mean, you can make it act in a very predictable way. Complex systems are systems that are made up typically of very, very many interacting parts that are controlled at a local level, and then their interaction as a whole is basically unpredictable by any means whatsoever.
So this is essentially when you start to bring in emergence, when you get into complexity, I think, because
Yes.
um, it seems like part of what you were talking about Laplace in the current discussion. He said he sort of thinks everything is just complicated, right? You can maybe that's one way of thinking about it. Everything is just complicated, and if you had enough, if you knew enough, you could sort of create this. You could sort of figure out determinately how one thing leads to another. Do you think that's a fair way of thinking about it?
Yeah, in a complicated system, you could, in theory, figure out, the whole chain of event from, in the past to the future. I mean, typically you can represent a complicated system with a set of equations, like mathematical equations that determine, okay, if you do this action, this is going to be the outcome for certain. I mean, you can determine the outcome with but sometimes in some systems that are complicated, you can't determine a exact outcome, but you can at least determine a probability distribution of potential outcomes with boundaries.
Okay.
You can say, let's say you roll a die, all right? So 1 through 6. So, of course, in theory, if you knew all the parameters at the start when you throw the die, the theory is you could calculate which number is going to roll, 1 through 6. In practice, of course, what we end up doing is, well, we have probability distributions. It's 1/6 chance of 1 and 1/6 chance of 2, and so on and so on. If you have 2 die, we can figure out the probabilities of various numbers. But we know we're never going to, if you have 2 dice, you're never going to roll a 13, right? Because it's 6 and 6 is maximum, so 12. So there are some boundaries. In complex systems, that's not the case. Sometimes you might be able, there's all kinds of different complex systems. So, some act differently than others, but in general, it's not possible to predict outcomes based on a simple formulation, simple formula. Now you just have to iterate the steps to derive like a future state of the system. You can't do it, but for each initial set of initial conditions, you have to run the equations all the way to the time that you want to predict in the future. You can't do it in general. You have to do it for every single set. It's a different, potentially, so, and then the results are nonlinear. The results can be, the results will jump from one.
Hold on.
Yeah.
I don't know. She's out of clue. But it's Gail. Sorry, there's a kid here.
Right. No, it's okay. So so the results in the complex systems are very, very unpredictable, and there are no. Oh, something going on.
They're having a water fight.
Oh, okay.
So, kids. So, yeah, you're saying the complex.
So you already mentioned it, but in certain complex systems, not all, but certain types of complex systems, you can have what's called emergence of certain properties that were not there until you reach a certain level of complexity. But very, very basic types of emergence, in relatively not complex. You can get emergence in systems that are not really complex, actually. So you take and the typical example that physicists use is the concept of temperature. The temperature of a single proton or even a single atom doesn't make any sense. You have to have a whole set of atoms moving around to actually get something that you can call the temperature of a gas or of a solid.
That doesn't seem to be the same kind of emergence you're talking about when you're thinking of something like consciousness, because
no, but it is in the sense, of course, consciousness is much more complicated. In fact, David Chalmers calls it. He probably is the only case that he knows of what he calls a radical emergence. So that it emerges. The property of consciousness is radically different than the physical universe that it emerges from. Whereas temperature, radically different. It's still pretty easy to relate it to the behavior of the individual particles forming, let's say, a gas.
I mean, couldn't you sort of, I'm going to show my ignorance, but couldn't you say something?
Can we pause for a second? I got it.
Sure. Just pause. Okay. Yeah, I was just saying, couldn't you sort of, when you're thinking about something like temperature, couldn't you sort of just say, okay, this particle interacts with this particle, and just sort of form this cause and effect model?
But you have to have more than one particle, right? Like one particle does not have a temperature, but then you get many particles, you can get something called the temperature. Same thing they say with the taste of salt, right? So, sodium chloride is just made of sodium atoms, and the molecule is made of sodium atoms and chlorine atoms, and together they form what's called common salt. And so to us it has a salty taste, but sodium by itself and chlorine by itself does not have any salty taste whatsoever, right? So in that sense, it's kind of an emerging property. The saltiness is an emerging property of these two atoms.
I guess what maybe
it's a very basic model, but when you're talking about consciousness, of course, that's way more complicated and way more radical. But it's just these examples of the salt or the liquidity or temperature, or the other typical examples are like the ant hill. 100 ants cannot form an colony, but that at a certain quantity of ants actually form a colony that can survive on its own. The 100 ants themselves are going to die. After a while, they're just not going to be able to survive as a group of 100 ants. But you reach a level of number of ants, and they will actually start forming, an actual colony with an ant hill. And
is part of what you mean by emergent that what has emerged is in some sense not physical?
Well, it can be physical, but yeah, in some sense, most of the time, in most of the time, that's correct. It cannot no longer be reduced to the physical quantity. So it goes beyond the physical.
So that's
here's where people get confused. So they think because it's beyond the physical, it's like completely separate from the physical. And that, John Vervaeke keeps pointing this out, and I can't remember if he uses for his terminology, but the concept is you have this emergent property which is no longer physical, but if you remove the physical, the emergent property will disappear.
Oh, sure. Yep. Yeah.
Right. So you still need that substrate for it to be there. So it doesn't become like some kind of supernatural thing that can stand on its own.
Mm-hmm.
The physical substrate to exist.
I guess
that's because that's the thing with people who say, well, you can't reduce consciousness to the physical, which I agree, and so therefore there must be like a supernatural soul or whatever you want to call it, a spirit or something that's extra physical and can survive outside of the physical realm. And my point is no, it is extra physical because it emerges out of the interaction of physical particles. But if you remove the particles, then it'll go away.
It sounds sort of like Vervaeke saying if you remove the physical, you get rid of the emergent thing. It's similar to the traditional view where the physical is dependent on the supernatural, so that once you remove the supernatural, you can have the physical, so that you are sort of interwoven in this way where you sort of can have the physical world without God, because it's the traditional view is that God is always sustaining the world in being. But the other question I had is, this is a weird, but what is the emergent property? What is?
Okay, stand by.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, what is the emergent property? I mean, what is it? Can I ask what it's made of? Can I ask how it exists? What is it metaphysically? I mean, if reality is just physical, and where does the emergent property exist? What is it? Do these questions make any sense?
Yeah, they do, and it's not an easy question to answer because obviously, to me, consciousness seems to be, coming from the interaction of the billions of neurons that we have in our brain, and nobody knows exactly how it emerges. Nobody knows. There's a lot of speculation. Some of it even involving quantum mechanical properties of the certain sub-portions of the brain. But of course, the people that work in artificial intelligence for a long time, there's a lot of debate on this, but many of them thought that if you just write the right code and you have enough computing power, then you should be able to create, which is different than simply artificial intelligence. I mean, you you can have intelligence in computers. You can beat grandmasters at chess games and things like that. It's a form of intelligence, but of course it has nothing to do with consciousness. It doesn't mean the computer is conscious. So how to achieve consciousness, nobody knows right now. And some people thought, well, we have parallel computers, and now, there's even quantum computers now, potentially, in the not too distant future. I mean, there are already some quantum computers, but they're pretty limited right now. And then the neural networks, all kinds of different ideas to try to make it work more like the brain appears to be working, or how the brain appears to be working. And nobody's figured it out yet, and I don't think we're very close at all to even figuring it out. Nobody, and even if you can figure out like some kind of basic consciousness, nobody has a clue how you would, let's say, code a computer to be able to taste chocolate, or to actually have emotions like love or fear or something like that. Nobody even has a beginning of the start of an inkling on how to do that.
I think that's that experience is the part that I would sort of attribute to something beyond, I guess. It's just our experience of the world is something I don't see how we could ever possibly reproduce. I just don't see that, but that could just be my limited.
Yeah, it's
imaginable.
I think it's possible, but it's not just writing more powerful code and more powerful computers. There's a lot more to it than that. The classic thing is that like in Star Trek, you have data, or, you have these artificial intelligence. And I think with the right architecture, it might be possible. I don't think you could create an artificial intelligence without it having a sense of having to survive somehow. I don't know. I'm kind of guessing here, but I think it would have to be a system that needs to interact with the world in a way that it can sustain itself. But that's just pure speculation. That's not my area of expertise. I've read a bit and I've listened to a bunch of videos, but honestly, people thought that it would be pretty close to, creating artificial consciousness, and I don't think we're anywhere close. In fact, most people now in the cognitive sciences and artificial intelligence, I think, would agree with that it's nowhere close.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, from what I hear, like one of the big breakthroughs is, you get this from Vervaeke's lectures, is that moving beyond this sort of, we just need to get the right code, is this interaction between the machine and the environment, and this mutual feedback loop is what's essential to moving artificial intelligence forward, is just recognizing how embodied it is, and how this mutual interaction between the organism and the environment is essential.
Yes, I agree with that.
So this brings us a bit off track, but maybe we'll come back. But how do you sort of think about technology and the future? Are you optimistic, or or pessimistic, or do you have sort of, you see dystopia or utopia?
I don't know. Say again, complex systems are of such a nature, it's completely unpredictable. So, obviously, I am a little concerned. I say I'm not concerned in the near term. I'll probably be gone before this happens. But for generation, the possibility of supposed singularity, where computers become more intelligent than humans and sort of take over the world. I also think that's a lot farther out than people think. I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Well, what about something like?
But it could happen someday. It's possible. I don't know. That's.
I guess what. Yeah. What
in your
sort of
lifetime.
creeps me out more
Yeah,
is
well, it
that,
is. Some people, some smart people, like Elon Musk and a bunch of others, are worried about it. And it wouldn't be such a big deal, except that now everything is interconnected, through the internet. So if a computer somewhere, becomes malevolent or something, it could easily figure out how to control a bunch of stuff in our lives, like power plants and I don't know how much interconnection there is. Some interconnection, but how easy it would be to manipulate all that stuff to do some harm to humanity. I could see it. It could probably happen. Yeah, I mean it's possible. Why a artificial intelligence would want to do that? What motivation would be? And apparently, of course, there is a lot of concern about this. So some people, their entire job is trying to figure out what safety protocols you would have to put in there. The classic science fiction novel on that, of course, is I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. But some people have debated that his rules were not really adequate to make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't harm humans. So
it's interesting. It's interesting there to think about the role of imagination here, where you sort of can either bring the future into being or sort of predict the future and prepare yourself. So, something like science fiction or dystopian or utopian novels are important because they sort of show people what could be coming or what direction we could be headed down or what some potential futures are, and help prepare us for that. It's an interesting faculty we have, the imagination, and I wonder how you think about something like the imagination with regards to reason.
Oh, imagination is crucial for novelty. So you can't with reason you cannot deduce novelty from past events through a reason. I mean that's you can do it in math. You can deduce theorems and stuff like that you had not seen before. But they were all contained in your premises, your axioms. In the real world, that's not the way it works. The imagination is precisely this thing that will spark new ideas. But you have to remember, though, or be conscious that most of your ideas are going to be bad ideas. So without reason, you're doomed. Because, evolution is the same thing. In evolution, most mutations are going to be deadly. And then once in a while, there's one that actually improves. But most new ideas are bad ideas. And so you use reason as a filter, your ideas through the filter of reason, and figure out which ones actually might make sense. All right. Nature, bad ideas basically are sorted out by death. The mutations that don't make it, the organism just dies and does not propagate its genes to the next generation. And that weeds out all those mutations that are beneficial compared to those. And most changes, but it's the same thing. So with human ideas, the great thing is we don't have to die. We can let our ideas die in our stead, right? So that's a major, major advantage. For a reason, we can sort of think through the consequences of our ideas that we might have gotten through our imagination. And we can sort of, deduce what the consequences would be or could be. It's not perfect, we have limited rationality. So actually the best is not to do it on your own, but to do it in a group. Rationality increases a lot because we're just, as humans, are terrible at criticizing themselves. So it's better to have a group where others will tell you, your idea there, I don't think it's that great, because I know they can explain it to you. They can explain their reasoning, their reasons to you why they don't think it's great. And that's a really good check. And that's why, as a group, we'll perform a lot better. And you could think of that as an emergent property of the group. is the rationality of the group as a whole is much higher than the sum total of each individual rationality.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that's why human culture is so important, because the culture is the embodiment of the sum total of the knowledge that a society has learned the hard way over generations and generations. And so that's why it's very critical. You can't survive without culture.
And even if you think of something like the scientific culture, where you have a community of people who embody certain practices, certain ways of seeing, they critique each other, and
yes.
they have certain procedures and rituals, you could even say, that they follow. And in that sense, if you want to be provocative, you could say the scientific community is sort of like a religious community, because they sort of hold each other accountable and participate in these rituals which give them a way of seeing the world. But maybe that's maybe being provocative, but you sort of see my point where...
Yeah, well, you can always say, definitely. But the rituals, though, are, they're based on reason. I mean, they're not like arbitrary, right? So there is a reason to do things the way they do. There's the kind of tests are admitted, peer review and all these things. Of course, you can think of it as, they've evolved along the centuries to be more and more refined.
Mm-hmm.
Even that.
Well, it has to be, right? I mean,
sure.
A part of, so I think what we've established here is that reason is communal and embodied in that sense, where part of what scientific reasoning is doing is reasoning within a community, and then reasoning by doing certain practices. And I think this whole process is in constant motion, because it's this agent arena relationship, right? It's this interaction with the environment, new revelations revelations feeds back into the system. So it's this, it gives you a much more dynamic, organic picture of rationality and knowledge than this sort of Cartesian sort of subjective inside your own head on paper type of thing, if you know what I'm getting at.
Yeah, right. But now there is a part, there are some rational arguments that stand on their own, and that has to do with the self-referential nature of humanity. So, for example, it's not possible. This is a truth about the world. It is not possible to argue against reason. Because to argue against reason, you have to use reason. So you would be involved in what's called a performative contradiction, that you'd be trying to use reason to disprove reason, which you just can't do.
Well, you could start picking away at the language.
Yeah, but you can do all kinds of stuff. You can say you deny a reason and you don't want to listen to reason. You can even attack people violently, not be reason. But you cannot reason argue against reason. That's a contradiction.
Well, I guess it just gets tricky because you have to define something like reason before you can make that statement. Yeah.
If you say there is no reason, is no such thing as reason, it's bad, it doesn't serve any purpose, we shouldn't listen to it.
Okay, yeah.
And that I don't, or do you consider that a reason for not believing in reason, or are you just trying to blow smoke and just, basically bullshit me into thinking something? But if you can't have reasons for arguing against reason, I mean, that makes sense, right? Because you'd be contradicting yourself. You're saying, I have this tool that's worthless, but I'm going to use it to prove that it's worthless.
Oh,
I'm going to use a tool I'm gonna use this tool to prove that this tool I'm using is completely worthless.
Well, maybe
You
that's
have to
something
prove
like,
that it's worthless. So that can't be done. It's the same thing as, you know, and it sounds trivial, but it's not. You cannot deny that humans must act. We must act, and therefore we must choose. You know, the mere fact that you deny something is itself an action. So you can't deny that people are forced to act. And among the actions that we have to do are, as soon as you act, you have to make choices. Just completely undeniable. That's a truth about the real world, and you cannot deny it. It's a fact. Because again, if you deny it, you contradicted yourself because you just acted by denying it.
what do you say to Luther, who says reason is a whore?
Yeah, well,
there's something to that, isn't there?
Well, I mean, you know, and well, David Hume, of course, more famously, you know, said sort of the same thing, but in a more, you know, polite way, I suppose. You know, like reason is and ought to be the slave of the passions. That's what David Hume said.
Yeah, that's how it gets used today.
So that's of course I completely disagree. That's false. You know, but you know, he's quoting it's the, you know, guillotine and all that, which is not true. It's just he was just wrong. You know, I mean, philosophers, even great philosophers, he was a great philosopher, but great philosophers have said all kinds of wrong things in the past.
But well, I guess you're sort of taking a view on reason, because I mean, Paul Vanderklee, for example, has said that he thinks reason is a coherence machine rather than a sort of correspondence thing. And I think, yeah, it's more about sort of maintaining a system.
Yeah, yes, but that's true. But that's how you can figure out that some of your ideas are bad ideas, because using reason, you can figure out they're not coherent. So reason basically is the art of, you know, the logic is identifying, pursue your idea to a certain point, and you actually able to prove both A and not A. That means there is a contradiction, and you know that original idea was wrong.
Yeah, yeah.
So that's the whole thing. Now, if in your head you can live with both A and not A, like, you know, something like this shirt is red, but it's also blue at the same time, well, then I can't help you, because pretty much, you know, you're insane. So the discussion has to stop at that point, right? I mean, that's what an irrational being. There are people that, you know, are like that. They're you know, we call them irrational for a reason. They are not able to see contradictions like this and take action based on that. So, you know, typically they'll end up in a mental asylum or something. But that, you know, it's sad. I mean, I wish nobody was like that. And thankfully, those cases over here are rare. Most people want to be irrational, although I would agree with Jonathan Haidt that, you know, in practice, most people are pretty irrational. You know, they follow. When I don't know, you're familiar with Jonathan Haidt's work on the metaphor of the elephant, or the emotional elephant, and the rider, the rational rider, and the elephant is stronger. So the rider is pretty much there along for the ride, and then comes up after the fact with post hoc, you know, rationalizing of what the elephant did. Either. I mean, I agree to the extent that in practice, most people do act that way. That's true. But I think you can escape that. It's hard. It's not easy. But I think you can escape that mode of thinking.
He would probably agree, but maybe you think it's a bit easier than he does.
Yeah, when you think about it, one of the things you can be passionate about is reason. So there you go. so yeah, I think you need both. You know, you need for sure you need imagination. You know, again in popular culture, I guess the sort of like the archetype of this tension between reason and imagination or the passions is Star Trek. You know,
Yeah.
Mr. Spock being the supposedly completely irrational. Now we know he's not because he's half human, and even a pure Vulcan still has emotion. They just said they are so suppressed, right? So they try to completely irrational. And then on the other hand, you have like Dr. McCoy, who's like the very emotional, you know, not irrational, but you know, tends to let his passions drive him more than reasoning. And then in the middle, you've got Captain Kirk, who's kind of like the Aristotelian virtuous middle, who kind of balances both sides, right? Which, as humans, that's what we should try to do. We shouldn't be overly emotional, and we can't be completely irrational either.
Somehow, there's this paradox.
Can I put on pause? I need to get the cat out. He's meowing out there.
Okay, sure. Yeah.
So back.
The paradox of hyper rationality being irrational. You know, Spock isn't really rational in some sense. He's actually irrational. I haven't watched Star Trek, but
well,
there's something irrational about it.
I mean, the problem with reason is that you know, if you want to use Daniel Kahneman terms, it's slow thinking as opposed to fast thinking. You know, his book, Thinking Fast and Slow, is you know, basically a reason is very good at weeding out what John Vervaeke would call the BS. You know, but it takes a while for us to go through the motions of actually deduction and figuring out if there's a contradiction. It's far from instantaneous. Like sometimes it can take days and days or years to try to mull over things that you're trying to reason about. Whereas emotions are necessary because they're very fast reacting. That sometimes could be very dangerous, right? So you don't have time to reason your way. Now, in the case of Spock in Star Trek, somehow he can compute stuff like super fast in his head, so it kind of compensates for that, for this lack of emotion. Because for us, you know, with reason, the way it's slow, if like Paul Van de Clay, you know, always talks about the tiger entering the room, you know, what are you going to do? Well, you better, your emotions of fear and, you know, fight or flight better take over like real quick, because if you start just trying to, you know, reason about it, yeah, you'll probably be dead before you come to a conclusion. So so there is a need for both, for sure. But
well, yeah, another strange thing with reason is, I get this from Ian McGilchrist in The Master and His Emissary. He talks about you know, the moment of insight, you know, the eureka moment that so many of the famous scientists have had, where just at the snap of a finger they suddenly know the answer to the problem. And it's not like they had to sit down and think through it. Somehow the process of thinking through it actually made it more difficult for them to see the solution. It was actually when they sort of stopped thinking about it, they somehow subconsciously came to the answer.
right. Yeah,
So
that's very true.
yeah,
It
so
doesn't mean that there isn't some rational, you know, I think a lot of it has to do with analogies, and, you know, I know when I'm thinking about stuff, I'll relate. I think relating different subjects, you know, going some of my best insights have been, you know, when I apply a method that's used in one field in a completely different field. That gives me, you know, I'll say, hey, this could be just like this. Like in physics, it would be, you know, analogous to this, and let's see where it gets me. And But yeah, you're right. The phenomenon of insight, yeah, it's fascinating. Nobody knows exactly how it works. Um,
Part of what's going on there, I suppose, is you can confuse slow thinking with bullshitting yourself, right? You're just caught in this trap of thinking, which you
yeah.
can't get out of. And when you take this distance from it, that's how you can gain insight.
Yes,
So
that sounds right to me. You know, you can overthink things sometimes, and then you get into
mhm.
a rut where you can't think outside the box. You know, that's a cliche. You know, thinking outside the box, but that's very easy for people to do. I mean, that's why it's a cliche. But most cliches have truth to it, right? So they're based on some reality, and it's true that we easily get trapped into certain modes of thinking, and you know, even our words, our vocabulary, kind of tends to trap us into
Oh yeah.
thinking. I'm not a big fan. Well, the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, you know, we're basically trapped inside our language. I believe in the weak version of that, in the sense that, yeah, our vocabulary limits in many cases what we can think about, but it's not an absolute limit. Now, the strong Sapir-Whorf hypothesis is that we're completely trapped in our language and we can't get out of it. I disagree with that completely.
I think it is. There's
It
there's
may,
a there's a lot to that. Again, if you connect this to the bullshitting thing, where you have this box or this language game within which you're thinking, and you maybe can do a lot from within this box, but you're constrained because you can't see other, you can only see what your box lets you see. And so what you need is an insight that makes you notice that you're within this box and that there is stuff outside of your box, and then you need
yeah.
an insight to
And
close this.
yeah,
This
Vervaeke
box.
talks about that a lot, you know, with the 9 dot problem and so on and so on.
Mhm.
So that was very good, you know, part of his lecture. But that's exactly true. It also has to do with the frame problem and things like that. Also, that's the human psyche is very complicated, but obviously I believe, you know, imagination and is very important insight. It's very mysterious in a way. Um, but on the other hand, I'm not an intuitionist in the sense that just because you have intuition doesn't make it the right thing. You still have to filter it through the filter of reason to try to make sure it's not. Now, sometimes if you don't have time, you have an intuition and you must act now. You don't necessarily have time. You have to go with your gut instinct. But if you have the time, you should submit it to the filter of reason and see if it really makes sense. So, you know,
Mhm.
just this looking inwards to find some kind of inner truth or something like this and say, no, I don't believe in that. I mean, you might find something, you might, but you shouldn't take it for granted that whatever you thought about is necessarily some kind of deep truth or anything. That it could be just BS. And the best check on that is, again, is your culture and the people around you. You know, if you start
Mm.
seeing yourself and you can't catch yourself through reason, which is very hard to do. Hopefully, people around you can help you do it. All right. So
Mm.
very important.
That's good.
Very important. That's why, you know, we have to help each other, and you know, we all make a lot of mistakes. And we need people to help us identify those mistakes. Um, People tend to learn more from their own mistakes than others' mistakes. That's just a human trait. You know, you can see a bunch of people make a mistake and you say, yeah, well, it just won't happen to me, until it happens to you. And then you learn, you know, then you learn
Mm.
a lot more, you know.
Participatory knowing.
Yeah, it's just the way it is. Yeah, participatory knowing.
Hey, that's a interesting topic. What do you think of the four types of knowing from Vervaeke?
Yeah, it's very, very interesting. Very, I think it's true. You know? It's
So in the current conversation, you said that truth is just propositional, but I guess you would maybe distinguish between knowing and truth there.
yeah, right. I do definitely do distinguish between the two. Truth is a adjective that or you know, something is true. The true is an adjective that applies to propositions. You know, You can't say like an object is not true. I mean, that makes no sense to me to say this, like this phone is true. What is that supposed to mean? It means nothing. Right? I can say this is true that this is a phone. So the sentence "this is a phone" is true, but to say the actual phone itself is true, what does that tell me? Nothing.
Yeah, you could maybe say that an existence is true.
So the phone can be useful. Yeah, I know, but see, people use the word "true" in different ways, and we instinctively understand what they mean, but we have to be very, very careful because of this. Because ultimately, true or false are things that apply to the descriptive function of language, not even just language, prepositions, the descriptive prepositions. Like in the argument, the human language has, well, the model I have, the human language has four functions to it. So, at the bottom level, you have a expressive function. So like when you say you're in pain, you can like even animals, they'll yell for you. So you can see that that's some form of language that's meant to express an inner state of affairs, right? So either pain or joy or something. And animals have also, not just humans. The next level, which is a signaling thing, and animals have this too. So let's say some birds, if they see a danger, they'll start chirping in a certain way, and that expresses, it tells other birds around them that, hey, there's danger coming, or something like that. And so that's a signaling function of language. Then at the human level, you start having the descriptive function. So you can actually describe things and events to other people around you. And that's where true or false. Your description is either true or false. So it doesn't only mean you're lying. It could be simply that you're mistaken if it's false. You don't necessarily mean it to be false. If you actually mean it to be false, then you are a liar. You're lying there. And there could be good reasons to do that too. So that is not condemnation, but you could simply be mistaken. And then there is the fourth function of language, the argumentative function. Obviously, that's strictly in the human world. Argumentative function that apply to that are valid or invalid arguments, right? So that's not, we're no longer talking about description now. We're talking about actual rationality and argument and arguing for the validity or invalidity of a certain proposition, right? So these are the four. Was it Karl? That's what Karl Popper distinguished those four, and he's not the only one. I think it's pretty common. But true and false are at that third level. So, like an argument, you don't say the argument is true or it's false. You say your argument is invalid, right? So it's if you say it's true, yeah, people might say that, but we know what you mean. You already mean it's valid or invalid, true or false. So, so I'm very careful about this. Now,
you could say, for example,
things are not true or false. They are real or unreal, right? Like something might exist or not exist, or that's the way I would talk about it. I wouldn't say an object is true. I would say it's real.
Yeah, but you could say, for example, you are not being true to yourself.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are expressions like that.
Which I think. So here's something that hangs me up a bit is. So you have sort of the physical substructure, and then you have the emergence, which you could call consciousness, and it seems like this propositional truth doesn't really get at this consciousness level. Because I think you need to start saying things like you're being true to yourself. I think you get into the sort of ethical domain of truth. You
understand when you use true that way, it's just a metaphor. It's not literally you're not being true to yourself. It's a metaphor. Of course, you can use it in that way, but
yeah, it's I don't know if it's. It just seems like a different form of truth.
Well, we use true in different ways, like
Oh, it gets actually fudgy because
if something is trait, say it's true. I mean, there's a variety of ways, but
and there are different forms of
in
truth.
the sense that let's say the debate on truth between Jordan Peterson and Sam Harris, that's in that sense is what I mean by true, false. That in the strict sense of the term. Of course, the word true is being used in different ways metaphorically, for a variety of, but that happens to a lot of words. That's very common. So you have to be a little careful. But yeah, I mean, obviously, we all know what that means, being true to yourself. But basically, it's a sort of equivalent to saying that you should not believe false propositions about yourself or something like that.
Well, it's more like you shouldn't act in a way that's not in accordance to the propositions you claim to believe.
All right.
So there's sort of this acting out of what you hold to be true. That's
correct.
That's so in that sense, action can be true or false. Well, so again, I wouldn't really want to use the language of false. Yeah, that's
pretty careful because you get into trouble when you're going. To me, it's more of a metaphoric, more than anything else. So you have to be very careful how you use this. But I mean, in a sense, I agree. That's how we use it. You being true to yourself is acting in accordance with what
what you believe,
beliefs tell you to do, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I have to be careful of that too, because again, I don't necessarily trust my inner beliefs all the time. You have to be very, very careful. People again are very prone to confirmation bias, to all kinds of biases. I mean, we have so many biases now. As soon as you become conscious of the fact that you have all these biases, it kind of decreases the power of these biases to some extent, but not completely. Particularly in the heat of the moment, right? If you have time to reflect on a situation, then maybe you can say, I tend to have this bias, so I need to be careful about judging this situation because, my past experience might bias me towards, thinking this or that. So if I have to think about it, yes. But in the heat of the moment, if you don't have time to think about it, your biases will probably show up again and again and again. Right? So you have to be careful of that, and that's why in a way, a religious rules and culture helps you to deal with that because it gives you rules you are always in the back of your mind and are ready to sort of be there to kind of quiet your initial instincts about something, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully. I mean, it's not a guarantee, but I think it's part of the purpose of injunctions that you find in religions about not doing this or not doing this, treating others like you would, have yourself, you would have them treat you, the golden rule. I prefer the silver rule myself, but
what's that?
Well, the golden rule is do unto others as you would have done unto you. The silver rule is do not do unto others as you would not have them do unto you. See, that's the norm for respect. So you respect people's boundaries and you don't infringe on them. You don't if you don't want them to bother you, then don't bother them, kind of thing. Do unto you as to you would have them do unto you, unto others, like that. The golden rule is more of a rule that speaks to loving other people, right? Because You know, I mean, if you want others do to you, well, what do you want? You want them to give you things, or I mean, I don't know what, you know. Everybody's going to be separate, but obviously, it's a little different because you really can't treat everybody like this, right? I mean, I want my family to treat me in a certain way, but I certainly don't expect the entire rest of the world to treat me that way. They can't possibly love me like family, right? So do unto you, well, do unto others as you would have done unto you. Well, yeah, I expect my family to do unto me certain things that I don't expect people, you know, far away from me, even in my community that are not my relatives, to do to me. So it's a very different standard. And
Mm-hmm. I guess part of it there is your sort of radical venturing of love to other people can have some pretty amazing consequences for them and for you. For example, I was listening to Sam Harris talk to a former neo-Nazi, and one of the things that apparently made him stop being a neo-Nazi is just the empathy he received from other people that was completely undeserved. So it's sort of that allowed him to break out of his sort of hating frame and stop BSing himself.
So in some particular cases, you can help people like that with love, but it's not possible for you to help the entire world, like to solve everybody's problems. There's 7 billion people on Earth, so it's just physically not possible. Right? But if you encounter a person face to face and they need help, you should help them if you can. But you can't expect, nobody can expect you to do this for everybody that you meet in the street. All right, it's just not physically possible. You still there? Okay, Ron.
Well, I didn't want to talk about the God 1, God 2 thing because I have an idea about how to think about it, maybe that I'd like to run past you.
Sure.
So maybe you could think of God 1 as physical law, and then God 2 as the natural law or the ethical code. And then you could sort of see by analogy why, human beings as emergent or conscious beings have sort of the freedom, as you said, to either choose to follow the natural law or choose not to follow it. You could see by analogy how God could have the freedom to choose to follow the physical law and not not follow it.
Yeah.
Or maybe another way of thinking about it would be God 1 as the physical layer and God 2 as the emergent layer. So I think one way of
that makes some sense, but my problem with God 1 and to me, God 1 represents both the what you call the physical laws and the natural law. So it's fitting the normative law. It's both, right? So we can't escape those laws. Now, even for normative law, right? So the thing is, we humans can make decisions. So we can say you come to a fork in the road, and you have to make a decision. Am I going to do good or am I going to do evil, or maybe it's two types of goods, but one may end up being better than the other. You have to make a decision, and if it's a moral dilemma, then it's up to you to follow the moral rules or not. But you won't escape the consequences. That's what I mean by you can't escape the natural law. You can choose to not do the moral thing, but you will suffer the consequences. Right? Now, the problem is, and this is Jordan Peterson talks about this or alludes to it, is that it's true that in one lifetime, some people can get away with being immoral and basically not suffer for it. But what is, the idea is that their descendants and their group and their tribe and their nation there's gonna be bad consequences downstream. Be somewhere somehow if you do evil.
That's a good point.
Right. So most of the time, people do suffer in their lifetime for doing evil. Occasionally, they can get away with it. That's true, and that's why the idea of God, of inferno versus heaven, and I can see that as a regulatory way to make people be moral. I get it.
Yeah.
So it's hard for me to really actually believe literally in those things. But I get the idea, obviously, because some people might think that, yeah, they can get away with murder, literally or, figuratively, one or the other. And that, it's no big deal because they'll get away with it. So it's like, if they think nobody's watching, so to speak, then it's okay. But, in our society, in our culture, we try to inculcate in people the fact that, well, for one thing, there are laws. So, if you do something immoral, you'll be castigated by your own group, your society, even maybe your own family. Maybe you will be punished by the law, and so on and so on and so on. So there are consequences, to follow. But regardless, that's the idea that I'm very much a consequentialist. In that sense that my definition of what's good and bad is that eventually, good has good consequences, bad has bad consequences. And the problem is people always think, well, bad consequences like right now. No, sometimes it can take years, decades, generations for the bad to occur. And that's the problem. That's why Jordan Peterson is right on with this. It's, that his idea of, when he was listing his potential ideas for what God represents, it's like, represents what happens over periods of time that we can't even, fathom us in our limited time that we have on earth. That these ideas, these archetypes, these rules are way, way beyond what anybody can figure out in their own lifetime. And that's why tradition and culture is very important to me. It's not like it's sacred in the sense that you can never question, something in your own culture, and you can, ask, hey, maybe we could do this a little bit better. And not reject your culture entirely. That's like suicide. We saw that in the 20th century. Horrible catastrophes: communism, Nazism, fascism. These were cultures that basically, okay, let's start from scratch. Let's reject everything that we know and build a new world on new foundations. Forget everything that our ancestors taught us. It's no good. We know better. And we're going to build this brave new world that is based basically on complete, well, in the case of the communists, basically, in their mind, it was a completely irrational thing to do. It was scientific materialism. So to them, it was really irrational. It was the best way to organize society. In the case of the Nazis and the fascists, it was a little different. It was based on an idea of, racial superiority, and but again, to them, it was what the science said. So in that sense, rationals, to them, it seemed rational, right? It was a scientific way. It was the superior race must win because that's the Darwinian. It was their reading of Darwin's, theory of evolution in their view. That's what it meant. That's not at all what it means, but that's the idea they had.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's so God 1 and God 2. So God 2 to me, here's the problem I have with the idea of God 2, is that if you have an agent God that can intervene at any time, and basically countermand the laws of of physics and the laws of the natural law anytime he wants. Of course, if he only does it on a very rare occasion, I guess we can live with it. But if it's too often, then we humans need order in our life. We need to have predictability in our life. Right?
Hey.
We need to be able to sort of figure out what's going to happen, that the sun's going to rise tomorrow, and that the seasons are gonna follow. I mean, so we know when to plant crops. And so if we have this world where on a whim, let's replace spring with another winter, let's prolong winter by 6 months, just because it's hard to live with that. So,
well, here's an objection.
Yes, go ahead.
I think what you want is a complicated God, but not a complex God. Maybe. And I think part of what God too is all about is it's sort of something like a relationship you have with another person. You can never completely map it out and approach it with this what Paul van der Klee calls the spirit of geometry. You sort of need to approach it with the spirit of finesse, and you have to take these risks. You have to reach the fork in the road and then decide one option instead of the other, and never really having any certainty about which option is better. And so I think God too is more about the lived experience of real life, where you have to venture and take risks and walk out into the unknown. And maybe you could think about it sort of as the walled city, which is maybe God 1, and then the outside unknown, which is God 2, and then this venture out is what is one way of thinking about it, expands the known. So
that's a pretty good way of putting it. That's good. So you're making sense. It's yeah. I mean, again, I'll think about it. So that's why I know I leave it open to possibility, but so far, and I'm not the only one. There's many other people in my situation that are just I don't know. I have a pretty irrational mind, and it's very difficult to let go of that. But on the other hand, I'll say I'm not an anti-theist. In fact, on Thursday, I'm talking to
Adam Friended.
Adam Friended. I don't know what time yet, but I'm supposed to do a video with him on Thursday.
Sounds good.
I don't know when you'll post it, though, or if you'll post it. He may, who knows? It depends how it goes. But I think we agree on a lot of stuff, obviously, from what I've seen. So we'll see. We're going to talk, and maybe we'll disagree on a few things. But it seems to me that, and maybe I'm a little bit more open to the idea of God too, possibly, than he is. But on the other hand, we do have a lot in common. So we'll see how that goes. But
well, I mean, when you say you get the idea of God 1, but you're a naturalist, does that mean you sort of like the idea symbolically, but you're sort of not willing to say there's enough evidence to believe in it, or something like that? Or
God 1, if you believe it as a symbol for the natural law and the laws of the universe, including the laws of complexity in the human world and human interaction, I believe in that. But see, that's different than God, an agent, right? That actually cares about me personally, right? The laws of physics don't care about me. If I jump from the Empire State Building, I'll crash, and they don't care that I live or die. They just act on me. Same thing with even the laws of moral. Like I told you, my view is if I act immorally, I probably will pay a price. If I don't pay a price, my children will pay a price. If they don't pay a price, their children will pay a price. Somebody will pay a price at some point.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a law. It's just the way it is. You can't do anything about it. I mean, that's you are subject to these laws, and that, but of course the laws of of complexity are much more difficult to figure out than the laws of physics. And the laws of physics are not easy, but the laws that rule human interaction are vastly more complicated in that sense. Because that's why I like to theory and systems control theory and those kinds of things, because that's how you can sort of tease out, how you can make it work. But right now, so far, mostly we figure out how to live with each other by trial and error. Right? So we've slowly figured out over the course of centuries and millennia how to better organize society so we end up not killing each other, right? So we've made a lot of progress, but we still have a lot. We still have some progress to make. You still there? The picture is gone.